I want to take just a second and explain credit reports. Credit reports are a very misunderstood item in our lives. Unfortunately, when we get through high school, we don't get the information that we need to be able to create a solid credit report. Credit report is basically a report that says whether or not the loans that you took out have been paid on time, how long that they are required to be paid on, the balances, what the monthly payment is, what type of an account it is, revolving installment, a balloon payment, a mortgage, HELOC, which is going to be a second mortgage type on a mortgage. Then we jump into kind of the nasty stuff that if you decide to not pay your credit card payment and they send you to collections, you could have a collection there. We're still seeing medical collections on credit reports, even though that is something that is not supposed to be going on. Also, if you file for bankruptcy or if somebody sues you and obtains a judgment, that's going to be on credit. All of these things come into play. And our job is to review all of that and make sure that we are able to give you a loan based off of how you've handled payments in the past. The biggest misunderstanding is that you have to have a credit score to be able to obtain a mortgage, and that isn't the case. You can get away with buying a home without a mortgage. We just have to build non-traditional credit lines, and I actually will cover that in a different episode. But just kind of right there, if you're learning how do I establish credit, I do have a really cool podcast that teaches the very basics of how to establish credit. Super short. It's only like 25 or 30 episodes to get you from point A to point B. And that's only the purpose of that podcast, is to just help educate. Anyways, our job is to review that line of credit. Credit cards are most interesting because you could have a credit card that is $1,000 balance and you could take out a $2,000 high credit limit. So the most I could qualify to take out is 2,000, but I owe 1,000. Minimum payment on that thing is $50. I'm going to qualify off that $50. But what is a big misunderstanding is just because I pull a credit doesn't mean I'm going to know whether or not you rack up more money on those credit cards. Be careful what you add to your credit cards because they're always a month behind on credit. And so when you are pulling a credit report, I could show, hey, it's April, whatever day it is today. It's April, and the credit bureau will not report that that credit card payment has been paid since March. So we're always usually a month behind when it comes to reporting to the credit report. It is really critical that any changes that you have go on with credit is explained. When we go through that credit report, we're looking at making sure you've made your payments on time. Do you have enough trade lines that it shows that you can make payments on time, and has that happened over 12 months? If we're short, there's ways that we can work around that, but we do need to have an actual credit score that is validated by the data that's on there. One of the biggest misunderstandings is that you can let an account go to collections and it'll sit there and sit there and sit there, and then if you just don't do anything after 10 years, it just goes away. The problem is I think creditors are pretty smart. Unless you have a professional helping you to fix it, what could happen is, let's just use Capital One as an example. And you have a Capital One card and you racked it up because you didn't understand credit. Then you decided to not make the payments because you couldn't or didn't want to or got mad or something, and that account went to collections. Well, Capital One is going to send it into collections, and that's going to report to your credit report. And then from there, they're probably going to sell it to a third party credit collector. And it could be, and I'll just use these fake names, but it could go to ABC Credit Collector and they sell that debt collection to them. So that will report to your credit report. And then after a certain period of time, that it doesn't get paid or dealt with, then they might sell it to XYZ debt collector. And so at the end of the day, that collection account that you had from your original credit card, it could potentially turn into 3 lines of credit that are negative on your credit report. So yes, I agree that there is a statute of limitations of things reported on your credit report, but the problem is the reality behind that is it isn't that hard and fast rule. On bankruptcies, if you file bankruptcy or have any of that negative stuff, a bankruptcy can report up to 10 years. We've seen them report right up to that 10-year mark. Not so much affecting you as much when you get to the 5+ on your date from your discharge, but it's definitely something that you've got to be aware of. If you do a bankruptcy, it's going to affect your credit scores for quite some time. On the address part of things, you will report addresses that you don't even know were there. If you sent mail to your aunt's house when you were in college and she was close to you, so you used her mailing address, that's more than likely going to show up on your credit report as an address that you've lived at. Not always is it accurate, but it's definitely a report that is going to follow you. It also comes up with name aliases. We see this a lot with women, obviously, if they change their name once they're married. Sometimes women use their middle name, sometimes they use middle initials, and then they have their maiden name, and then they'll have their married name, and then a combination of all of this. And so there's aliases on there too, which is fine. It's just sometimes interesting because there's a lot of different aliases. What is fun is when we've had people who have been married a couple of times and all those names come across. We just always want to double check that those people have some sort of connection to our client, because fraud and identity theft and all of that is rampant. We just want to always make sure that the information that is there is accurate. And then on the inquiries, this is also an interesting thing when it comes to a credit report. Inquiries are damaging to your credit score. And I once had a car dealer tell me that I needed to do a car application with him. And I said, no, absolutely not. Well, we need to. No, we really don't. The branch manager said, yes, this is a requirement of you buying this car. No, you're not pulling my credit report. Well, we only pull it one time. No, I can guarantee you don't, because I see credit reports on the daily basis. And I applied for a car at ABC car dealership. I'm not going to use any names so I don't get myself in trouble, but I applied for a loan at ABC car dealership because they were going to get me the best interest rate. And pretty soon that is 15 inquiries later. Supposedly, there's some sort of a law that protects consumers to have that happen, but unfortunately, we're still seeing many inquiries come from car dealers. Just be very cautious with that. Inquiries do affect your credit scores, and they do affect them for a few months, so be cautious there. And really, the most critical thing that I can tell you is when you are applying for a loan and you want to obtain a credit report, just double check your social security number and your date of birth when you're entering your loan application. So many times we get applications that we don't know that the social security number is wrong until we pull it. And sometimes it's like, oh, it starts out with a 518 number and somebody fat fingered it and did 581 instead of 518. And we'll still get a report because that name is tied to somewhat close to that number, but we still end up having to repull a credit report, and that is a hard inquiry, and we don't want to do that unless we absolutely have to. Just take some time and actually double check that social security number, that it is accurate and that it's yours. We actually did some financing for some people years and years ago, and the same person applied with the same social security number. Luckily, we were paying attention. It's a different person, I should say. A different person applied with the same social security number, and we don't want to have any of that going on. Make sure it is your social security number that was given to you at birth, or if you became a citizen, when it was given to you at the time of citizenship. Credit reports with credit scores, the higher the scores, the better. Credit scores that are lower does not make it a deal killer. We love to look at credit reports and see if there's anything that we can do to make those scores higher, because the higher the credit score, most of the time, the better the interest rate. And that's what our ultimate goal is to get into as low of an interest rate as we possibly can for the sake of your monthly payment. If for some reason your credit scores are just disgusting, you've just beat the snot out of it because you weren't educated, or you just decided to be dumb, because sometimes that just happens. If you were just dumb, uneducated, and now you've damaged your scores, it'll take you 24 hours to destroy it. It'll take you 24 months to fix it. That's what it is. So if you have damaged your credit, there's a lot of tips and tricks that we have come up with that we can definitely help and go through some of those things. I am not a credit expert, but I definitely have a lot of tips and tricks. And then there's also places online. They tout that they have the ability to fix credit. All I'm telling you is do a lot of vetting, because there are a couple of companies, and I won't name them, but there are a couple of companies that just take your money and they don't fix the credit. There are some good ways to fix credit on your own. Ultimately, learning how to build credit correctly is the most ideal way to go. If you've got any people around you, have them listen to my podcast, and I'll link it into this little thing so that you know where to go. I just want to explain credit reports at a very high level. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us, comment below. Have a good day.